even though we're past this psychological point, I think that there's significant upside to the stock going forward.
You know, Scott, Gene just raised something that it's been a key point, and that has been that the bears of Apple for years now have said Tim Cook is no Steve Jobs. Is that just insignificant? Does that argument need to go away?
If you're asking me, I think that's, I was just about to say, look, I remember back when Tim first took the role, there were a lot of questions. He's not a creative guy, he's more execution and product. We're not going to see the sort of innovation cycles and excitement that Steve created in the brand and across the culture of the company. And I think, again, he's not going to, I don't think, spike the football today either. I agree with, if Steve were here, he would not be doing that. And I don't think Tim will either. I think they should all be very proud of this. But I think it certainly validates the choice to bring Tim in as the CEO and the execution and teamwork that he's done to get to this level. And I don't think this is a stopping point personally. I think it's one of the most amazing companies in the world with lots of room here for expansion, as we talked about earlier.
Tony, I wonder what your assessment is right now of kind of investors' mindset with regard to Apple as you talk to clients. There's this storyline out there that it's almost an under-owned stock if you consider, Berkshire Hathaway owns 5%. The company itself is the biggest buyer of it. It's already the biggest kind of stock in the benchmark. Maybe investors don't own enough. But do they actually believe in a multi-year story here, or does it just seem like kind of a financial engineering play and this one quarter's good numbers?
I don't think there's a belief there's a financial engineering play, but I do think that investor sentiment around Apple has been somewhat blasé over the last 6 months. And, the debate again really circles back to iPhone. iPhone units are flat for the 4th straight year. It's a key driver of the company. What can I get excited about? And so I think for the last 6 months, my sense would be that there's been relatively lower interest in Apple, particularly among long-only investors.
Let me interrupt for a second. Respectfully, I think that, and I'm on a little bit of a different side than being an analyst today, but still talk with those same investors. And I feel like there's a shift going away from anxiety every quarter about the iPhone. Albeit if they would have a terrible miss on the iPhone, that would be bad. But I feel like there's this kind of sense that as long as it's a stable business and generates a substantial amount of cash and grows services, that's enough. And would you agree or disagree with that?
I'm not sure I would agree with that, Gene. I mean, we saw the stock take a big hit in early January when people were fearful that the cycle was going to be weak. And I think for the most part, people feel pretty comfortable about the next year because prices will be robust. But I can assure you, if iPhone units are down more than 3% next year, regardless of what happens in the rest of the business, the stock doesn't work. And that's the ambivalence that I think investors feel. Now, do they feel a little bit better that Apple's been able to take price? Absolutely. Do they feel good about buybacks? Yes. Do they feel good about services? Yes. But when push comes to shove, and you see it in how people get anxious when data points come out of Asia, if there's a belief that the iPhone business can't grow units on a go-forward basis, that really troubles investors. Yeah. And I would fully agree that's still there.
I would agree that if it was in decline mode for a couple of quarters, that would be bad. I think if investors can get comfortable with 0 to 5% growth over a year, they're thinking about it more holistically. Over a year, I think the stock continues to move higher.
Yeah, that's an interesting debate, given how many random headlines we hear from Nikkei regarding supplier clues and supply chain checks. We want to check in with two people, Aswath Damodaran on valuation here. But first, I want to turn to Josh Lipton and talk about whether or not any of this today, Josh, and this historic mark is a topic of discussion within the company.
I just caught up briefly, as you know, Carl, this with Tim Cook. We didn't raise that question because I know Cook has been asked that before and clearly said it wasn't a big emphasis of his, which I don't think is that surprising. Listen, as you guys have mentioned, it doesn't fundamentally change anything with the company, and that's what Cook and his team are concentrating on. Obviously, psychologically, it's a big, exciting milestone for the company, Carl.
Aswath Damodaran, we talked about valuation yesterday. We've asked several analysts today whether or not this milestone acts as a cap on sentiment or valuation. Is it totally meaningless?
I do think it has meaning, but for a pricing game. From a valuation perspective, getting to $1 trillion doesn't change the mechanics of how you do valuation. But I think what's fascinating is that they've managed to get to $1 trillion while returning more cash than any other company in history. I mean, they've returned $300 billion in cash over the last 6 years. That's amazing to be able to return that much cash and still be able to get to $1 trillion in market cap.
Aswath, I'm going to put the same question to you that I did to Roger McNamee earlier in this hour, and that is, what is the psychological impact of Apple hitting $1 trillion? From an investor and from a market standpoint, does it make it that much more potentially likely for some of the other big cap tech names like Amazon, which gets tossed around a lot, to move there as well?
I don't think so, because this has been a long time coming. Apple's been close to this number for a while now. So from that perspective, I don't think it changes the psychology of the market. I could be wrong because I'm not great on pricing psychology, but I don't think it changes the psychology of the market.
Aswath, you said that it's a little bit striking that Apple has reached this level while distributing some $300 billion in cash over recent years. Couldn't you turn that around and say that the way it distributed it by raising its dividend and, of course, buying back a lot of stock perhaps had a role in the way the market is valuing the company on the positive side?
Well, I think it is being valued as a cash cow, but the reason I think it's so impressive that the buybacks have not had an impact on the overall market cap is the share count at Apple has dropped about 20% over the last 6 years. So with fewer shares outstanding, you got to make up for it with a higher stock price, and that's why it's so impressive. It's a cash return. I think it's half the game, but the other is they're able to deliver price appreciation on the remaining shares.
Right. That is how the math works, I guess. The question becomes from now, does the market value the cash that Apple still has in any way except to say, just hand it to us? Or is it seen as something, as a strategic, war chest?
I think companies earn the right to be free. And in this case, Apple, because of its success, has a chance now to go out and try something else, as long as it's not outside the zone in which they're successful. So I think the market will cut them some slack if they decide to experiment and try something new. But as I said yesterday, I hope it's not a big acquisition. I'd like to see them try to expand their business model out of the smartphone. But it'll take a lot of doing, but I think they have the benefit of being successful and being given the benefit of the doubt right now.
I have to laugh, as some have told us this morning, that hitting the mark, that institutional managers don't think about this kind of stuff, and then it sells off when it's a penny above the mark.
It clicked there, and then it's backed away. Absolutely, yeah.
Back to 206.5. Not to say we might not reverse it again through the course of the day.
Yes.
But definitely an historic morning.